Hey, I think we're going to go ahead and kick it off. There are some open seats. The conference has asked us to suggest that if you do have open seats next to you, if you can squeeze together a little bit. We've been having a lot of people in the back of the rooms at a lot of these sessions. We're going to go ahead and kick it off. I'll have some introductions. So I'm Darinn McAdams. I'm a principal engineer at AWS.
And I'm Erik Gustavson. I'm an engineering manager at Google.
Cool. And we've been working together a bunch, as well as with many other people, many other companies, in a new standard called FastFed. And this session is going to tell you kind of what problems we're trying to solve and a little bit of how it works behind the scenes. So the problem we had was really a low adoption of federation in the enterprise. And you're here at this conference, you might be hearing words at a lot of these sessions like OpenID Connect and SAML and all these single sign-on protocols. And what we discovered as a service provider is that almost nobody was using them. So despite all this talk about how great it is, we're seeing very low adoption. It's not surprising to see federation rates in the low double digits, sometimes single digits. And so we sort of asked ourselves, like, why is this good stuff not being used? Most people are just choosing to create yet another login and password. And the answer why is it's hard to configure. Just to give you an example, here's if you're trying to connect from G Suite, Erik company, to AWS, my service. This is the instructions. These are 44 convenient steps to set up single sign-on from Google. And this is not at all unusual. Just a huge, huge number of steps. You have multiple browser windows open, and you're copying and pasting things. Along the way in those instructions are all sorts of strange terminology. I remember my first time going through this, and I'm like, ACS URL? What's an ACS URL? Like, I'm out at like step 3. I didn't even understand any of this stuff. You have to map user attributes, and what I mean by that is in your directory in G Suite, for example, you may have the person's name stored as given name, but an app may want it as any one of these values or even something else they just made up on their own. So you have to be like a universal translator between your directory and apps just to set up single sign-on. Besides the sign-on portion, you have to think about user provisioning. Like, how do the user accounts get created in this app before the person can even sign in? And then you get more terminology and even more to configure, words like JIT and SCIM and user lifecycle management, more to learn. The end result, once you get it all set up, is usually something like this, which just doesn't work. And then you got like 1 to 2 weeks maybe of calling tech support at whoever will answer the phone. You're calling your identity provider, your service provider, trying to find someone to help you. Like, you don't even have access to these logs. You don't even know why this is happening. They'll eventually help you figure it out. You'll get success. Everything's awesome until about a year later. If you're using SAML, you probably know what happens a year later. You forget it's coming, and your employees just tell you they can't log into anything. So this was the pain that we knew when we were trying to solve. It's pain for everyone. If you were the system administrator trying to configure this, you're budgeting 1 to 2 weeks. You have to be an identity expert. Anything you learned may not translate into your next one that you set up because they're all different. So I've heard up to 4 weeks to configure some of the most complicated apps. If you're Erik, trying to build, say, a catalog like those instructions we showed you for how to set up single sign-on, each one of those is custom to integrate. There's nothing repeatable there. And if you're a service provider like AWS, trying to get into Erik's catalog, it's not self-service. Everything's different. As we talk to app builders, one of the things they tell the standards groups over and over and over again is you made all these standards, but none of them play together, and they're all like 100 pages, and I only have to do a subset. Like, just tell me what I should be doing, please. I'm trying to do the right thing. And so we looked at this and we said, well, why is this so painful? And really what's going on here is we have 2 computers that need to exchange information. And we've picked a human being to be the mechanism to convey information between 2 computers. The world's most unreliable, error-prone data bus we ever could have picked for conveying information between 2 computers. And so what we really thought about is, like, how do we get the human out of this? Let the computers talk to each other programmatically and just exchange this information. So that was really the goal and why the FastFed working group kicked off. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to tempt the gods here and try to do a little bit of a live demo. Before we show you how FastFed works, we're going to show you what it does. And I'm going to do half of this, and then I'm going to hand off to Erik here. So let me hop over. So here I am. I am an administrator of some AWS accounts. This is the AWS sign-in page. If you use AWS, you've seen this before. I'm going to sign in. What I just signed into is something that maybe not everyone is familiar with. AWS has historically, you've had identities per account. This is a new offering. It's called single sign-on that lets you create one sort of footprint for your organization, define all your people, see all your accounts, and define permissions between them, all in one place. You don't have to hop between accounts. So it's really helpful in that way. But as you can see, this is a fresh greenfield sort of installation. And it's showing my users, and it says no users found. I haven't created my users yet. It's just sort of an empty container. And in this demo, what I'm going to show is my users. For example, I'm using G Suite, where I'm storing my workforce. And so how do I get my workforce into this from G Suite without doing like 44 convenient steps? And so this is where FastFed comes in. And I'm going to click this link that's called Add an Identity Provider. And there's a couple options here. That last one, that's the manual copying and pasting the way you're doing things. But here's the new one. Now, to be clear, this is a sort of a demo. So the UX is not what we're actually going to ship, but it's enough to give you a taste. Notice what I'm doing first here is I'm going to enter my email. And this is my email in G Suite, my G Suite domain. So I'm going to click Next. And it says, oh, would you like to connect with G Suite? That's your identity provider. I definitely would. And something happened really, really fast. So let me point out what happened. Notice a new browser tab opened. And we are actually in Google now. So AWS has sent me over to Google. Google is asking me a little confirmation question. Are you sure you want to set up single sign-on with AWS? It's going to use, in this case, SAML and Skim. I'm going to click Confirm. And it's done. So let me pop back over to AWS. Notice the identity provider now says G Suite. And if I click on that, there's a whole bunch of information. This would have been the stuff that you manually copied and pasted that is just there. And if I hop back into Google, there's a little bit of logs. We're going to dive into this a little bit more later on, but you can actually see a lot of information getting passed back and forth, and we'll explore that in a bit. So that's all cool. So let me hop over to one. So it takes a little bit for Skim, if you're familiar with Skim, to do all the user provisioning. We have one here that's already been done. And this is what you'll see. All the users are just there. All you had to do is click buttons to make this happen. Just to show you that it's truly real. I'm going to set up permission for someone to actually sign in from G Suite to AWS. So I'm going to give Erik permissions to project 2. Assign users. I'm going to give them to Erik. Just for now, I'm just going to give them read only. I don't think you need admin access. So we're going to let that do its thing for a moment, and success. So at this point, as an administrator, I am done. And this is where Erik is going to take over as an end user. So this is Erik signing in as just an end user, someone in the company that I gave access to.
So here I'm on the G Suite launcher page, and I will find Amazon, which has now been configured. Hit that, not hit Apple. And now I've been to AWS. I can see my projects. I can go to the management console. It's letting me in. Voila, I'm in.
All right, so that was the demo. It worked. Let me hop back to the from current slide. There you go.
So the question here, isn't this already been solved? We have social login. Why isn't this sufficient? No. The enterprise is different. I don't know who my identity provider is. I don't see it on that social login list. It's certainly not Twitter. I can't change my identity provider. The IT department set that up. I'm connecting my entire organization. It's not just my account that I care about. Sometimes I'm dealing with multiple organizations. I've got to collaborate. I need to go through security reviews, approvals. I just can't unilaterally decide to set up this SP. Probably I'm actually not the administrator of the IDP. I'm just the SP admin. Or maybe I'm the admin of the IDP and I'm trying to get all the SPs that my organization uses to be signed up here. As an app developer, which IDP should I support? How are they multi-tenant? Am I doing with one that's on-prem? My customers expect me to do this. This is blocking sales deals. I'm getting grief from my sales team. And I can't possibly register with everything. I don't even know what the full list of IDPs are. So I need fundamentally different capabilities than social login. I need FastFed. So how's it work? First thing, this is not a replacement for SAML, OpenID, or Skim. It's not a replacement for any of these underlying protocols that have already been widely adopted and battle tested. It does orchestrate the configuration of them. As Darinn mentioned, this is removing the unreliable human from the middle of this and making an automated process. It's getting the identity provider and the service provider to directly interact. How do they find each other? What's the discovery mechanism? How do they understand each other? What's the negotiation? SAML, OpenID. What do I want? What schemas do I want with SCIM? What do I need? And then how do I create an ongoing configuration channel so that I can pass key material back and forth to deal with that certificate expiry problem without having to stop the world to have my Salesforce account break for all my salespeople during the middle of the end of quarter. So Alice, working for a company, is trying to manage the service provider. It's going to discover what company it is, what the IDP is. We're using WebFinger for that. I'm going to get back where that FastFed URL is. Now I'm going to go get the metadata from that. You saw this in the live demo, the information going back and forth. So this is all the metadata about what the identity provider supports. What my capabilities are. I do SCIM, and this one does SCIM and SAML. What schemas do I want in SCIM? What information do you need to know as a service provider in order to configure it? How's that key going to work later on? And then where do I start the FastFed handshake? So I need to get, as the SP, my IDP information, the tenant ID, public key, expiration date on that. So I'm going to make a request to the IDP. Now I'm going to actually authenticate in here. I'm passing this data over. This is what I'm looking for to do. First, I'm going to check, hey, is Alice actually able to log into the identity provider? I mean, are they a member of that IDP, or is this some kind of really fancy phishing attack? Then I'm going to confirm that I really want to do this. You saw that confirmation screen. Next is invariably this, we're talking about enterprise IT, so there'll be some reviews and approvals that go on to say we actually want to connect these things together, and this is how we want to do it. Assuming we get a thumbs up, that's all good. We'll send it back as complete registration to the service provider. This is direct server-to-server communication. It's all signed. We can check it's valid. If it's good, thumbs up. We're all happy. Now I can respond back with the metadata that I want to pass in. So what are my OAuth client IDs and secrets? How are you actually going to talk to my SCIM endpoint? What's the metadata for SCIM? What's the SAML metadata that I might need to pass over to the IDP, if anything? And now at the end state, both sides of the relationship have everything they need to do to have this connection. We've replaced those 44 steps with just the single button click. That's pretty much what happened in the demo. Demos like this are never all that super interesting because the whole point of it is to make it not interesting and get rid of all those steps. We'd love to have more participants. The FastFed working group currently has a number of members. It's growing. Anyone who's part of the OpenID Foundation, please come. You can come join it. This is the information on it. And then tonight from 6 to 7 p.m., Amazon has graciously offered their hospitality suite. I hear there's going to be free beer.
There may be free beer, if that matters.
According to Darinn. So blame him if it's not there. But we'll be doing an AMA later on if you want to dig in deeper into the standard, what we're trying to get accomplished, and kind of where we're going with this. I think that is...
There was a whirlwind tour of FastFed. I think one other cool thing to highlight, that connection that gets established, we're even going beyond just the, replacing the manual copying and pasting of the metadata. We got that out. But they've also set up this sort of a long-lived, now that the computers know how to talk to each other, they can keep talking to each other. And so that's how, for example, the SAML certificate rotation can be handled, is because now each party can poll for, is there anything new in this configuration? Has anything been changed?
Do I need a new SAML cert? Do I need a new icon? I don't know if you noticed the icon was part of that metadata. Do I want a different schema out of SCIM? Do I want to advance the state of the art of that connectivity between the systems?
Yeah, so it's like simplifies the setup and keeps it going, which I think is the two cool things. That's the whirlwind tour of FastFed.
FastFed, thank you.
Questions?
Yes.
All right, is this on? Can we get the roving mic on?
Just want to understand. So this is currently for AWS application. So in future, will it be the standard for any SP, which will be compatible with this?
I can take that one.
Yeah, you want to
the question was, is this, this was just AWS. Is this going to be for any service provider? We want the answer to that to be yes. Nothing about this is Google or AWS specific. As you saw, there's a number of people in the working group. We think everyone should not have to be miserable in setting up single sign-on, no matter where you're setting it up. This should be the experience everywhere.
This is really lowering the barrier to getting single sign-on implemented, which means if the barrier is lower to being implemented, that means more SPs and IDPs are encouraged to actually support each other.
And less logins and password proliferation is just goodness, no matter what.
So this solution is going to work for enterprise, right? If an enterprise decides to change their IDP, what will be the roadmap for the service provider and the enterprise to work upon?
So sort of migration. I don't think we've addressed how you could do a live switch of IDPs, but you could run, given the idea this setup is supposed to be very minimal, you could run through this process again with the new IDP and then have it connect up to the SPs.
Well, yeah, there's nothing that prevents you from doing it twice. What we showed was definitely the demo where we discover the identity provider from the email address. If you, I typed in my, Darinn, and it picked out the right identity provider. If you're picking a new identity provider, but you're not ready to flip the whole company yet, there's another radio button that we didn't show you in the FastFed experience where you can hand paste a specific identity provider endpoint and just go through the same flow, but with a new one. And then you'll have two in your app. Yeah.
Anyone else? Questions? Oh, got one over here. All right, I'm coming across. I'll try not to trip and do a Superman on the way. All right, let's see. And I'll get you next.
What are you currently thinking of doing for the translation piece of the custom attributes that you mentioned as a pain point?
Well, part of the reason of standardizing on SCIM is it does actually have opinions in the schema for what those should be. So an SP should know how to translate its custom attributes into a SCIM protocol. And then the IDP should be able to understand the corresponding attributes from its directory and how they relate to the schemas. That's why there's a schema listing there, not just a list of attributes.
Hey, good presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
So the question I had was this. So one of the adoption challenges is, of course, the configuration. 44 steps, maybe 442, right? Like the question I had was this. From a federation setup perspective, usually the users who are currently being set up for single sign-on are those who are actively employed. So they are in the active directory bucket or the active employee bucket. Mm-hmm. There is also, in the life cycle of users, terminated users, users who are contractual laborers, who are not necessarily in your primary payroll group, right? So not necessarily served or authenticated with the same IDP. Mm-hmm. How does this work in, or how do you see it working in that kind of model where the users really are not in the primary AD?
Don't do that.
Yeah, so I guess there's probably two ways to do it, and I think the industry is sort of playing with those two ways. One is you could just run through FastFed. What you'd probably do today maybe is you'd set up maybe like 2 or 3 different identity providers into your app, if that's what you do. So you're manually copying and pasting that information 3 times. You could go through FastFed 3 times, and so you're still doing that 3 times. It's just easier. Another direction the industry is sort of playing with is to do that aggregation on the identity provider side. I think they're both valid approaches.
And I think ultimately this gets down to, this is where FastFed's not trying to solve that necessarily those problems of the underlying SAML single sign-on or SCIM. SCIM could certainly deprovision the users who shouldn't have access to an active application only employees should, and maybe there's applications that ex-employees should have access to, and that could be supported by the IDP. So it gets to the configuration of the underlying systems and what capabilities they support, and less about how they get talking to each other in the first place, which is what we're trying to get after.
Is it a programmatic way to do this kind of a setup?
In which way?
Between the SP and IDP, is it a roadmap for programmatic configuration?
Yeah, the idea is to be completely programmatic. We do require there's some kind of authentic or some type of at least a minimum authentication. If I'm the admin of the SP, I have to prove that I have a login of some kind into the IDP. Otherwise, random people could try to spoof that connection. So we have that minimum there. After that, it's actually 100% programmatic once both sides have agreed that they want to make that federation.
The SAML protocol configuration is basically technical people does it one time or probably maintenance, right? But there is a lot of attributes, a lot of use cases, a lot of configurational data. Like some application supports IDP initiated, some application supports encryption, some application needs certain attributes to be given. And some of the applications is not one federation endpoint, multiple federation endpoint. So it is a lot more technical discussion that need to be happen between IDP and SP. And before even the connection is established. Oh, yeah. Can this FastFed protocol support all those use cases?
Sure, let me make sure I understand the pain point. like SAML, for example, the specs, like hundreds of pages probably if you read them, and like two different parties can both implement SAML and be perfectly non-interoperable because they pick different subsets. Is that what you're sort of, and then how does FastFed sort of bridge
Yeah,
that?
because there are a lot of choices technical
Yeah.
people need to do before the service provider and IDP talk,
Yeah.
right? Just it's not a protocol alone,
Yeah.
because the technical decision has to be made by the technical people before the metadata exchange between
Yeah,
them, right?
FastFed definitely had to tackle that one. And what we did, there's actually, if you go look at the specs online, you'll see 4 of them. There's a core one that sort of describes this handshake. And then there's a supplemental one for each protocol. You'll see one for SCIM, one for SAML, one for OpenID Connect. And what it basically does is it gets opinionated. It's saying if you're building a web app and you're going to support SAML or OpenID Connect or whatever, you must do this way. And FastFed lets you specify different protocols. So maybe if someone in banking wants to do things differently than healthcare, they can agree on different interop profiles. But there are definitely interop profiles. This is the way to do it. And we're really trying to get to that problem that we heard, which is as developers, you're trying to add these capabilities to your app, and you see these long specs with a million ways to do things, and you're like, I'm the 80% common case. Just tell me what to do. We're trying to do that. Just do it this way.
I think that's the key that we're after here is let's get the 80% case out of the way. There are always going to be much more sophisticated, very nuanced, but the main barrier that you have as an admin of an SP and kind of connected to an IDP is just getting it going in the first place. I mean, even those 44 steps, there's nothing all that special that needs to be communicated back and forth. And there's cross purposes too, because we are being opinionated about using SCIM and a single sign-on protocol. So a number of use cases that are coming through currently as a claim in SAML, we could delegate that down to the SCIM protocol, which is going to be better suited for that attribute mapping.
All right, so we do have more Q&A. If you have any more questions, we'll be in the AWS Hospitality Suite from 6 to 7. Both Eric and I will be there.
And free beer.
All right. Thank you.